family walked into the music school where I was teaching in 2011. A mom, a dad, and 2 sons, 10 and 13. The 2 boys held drumsticks. They looked pretty nervous, just like any other beginning student I've ever had. And as usual, I start running through the motions of meeting new students. Ask them where they're from, ask them what made them choose music, summon an ounce of energy, try to pretend like I'm not a hungover 21-year-old totally winging it. But then the receptionist said, "This is Eddie. He's 13, and he's going to be your first student today." And I said something really lame, like, "Hey, buddy, what's up? Ready to swing those sticks and bang on those drums?" Not surprisingly, I got no reaction from him. But Eddie seemed more shy than most kids, like cloistered almost. So as we're walking back to my studio to start the lesson, his mom follows right behind me, and she says, "Hey, by the way, Eddie's deaf. Is that going to be a problem?" "He's deaf." To which I replied, "What? He's who? What? Deaf? Him? No, that's crazy. Okay, yeah, whatever, we'll be fine." I was trying to pretend like I wasn't fazed, but I was freaking out. I mean, I had trouble teaching kids who didn't listen to the radio much. This kid has never listened to music. So we make our way back to the studio. Eddie sits behind the drum set. I sit behind my desk at my computer. It's pretty silent. I heard my dinner digesting from the previous night. And when I feel awkward, I'm the kind of guy who just runs his mouth to fill up that empty space that weighs down that with social anxiety. But, that's not an option. So I start frantically running through the usual first lesson icebreakers in my head. Okay, ask the kid what their favorite song on the radio is. Nope, that's not going to work. Put on an easy play-along song like We Will Rock You. Just get things going. Nope, that's not going to work. Just get to know the kid. Nope, I don't know sign language, and he doesn't read lips. I mean, as a teacher and a human being, I was just utterly lost. Curriculum was a joke at this point. So I made my way behind my drum set, and I felt like I was failing him already. And I hit one of the drums just, I don't know, as a tick, unintentionally when I'm thinking about something. And when I hit the drum, Eddie's head snapped towards me. My head snapped towards him. I know he didn't just hear that. I hit it again, and he smiled. Okay. So then I hit the crash cymbal. That's typically like the shrillest, loudest part of the drum set. I hit that. Psh, nothing. He looks confused. Didn't seem to do much for him. Interesting. So then I hit the bass drum, that giant drum that sits on the floor, the one you hit with a foot pedal. I hit that, and his face exploded. He moved in his seat. So we just started laughing. I mean, now we were having fun. We were exploring things. We were learning about sound, things about each other, about what music really even is. That's the day that Eddie started to become a drummer. Okay, so what we were doing that first day, it wasn't so much making music as it was an exploration of what sound is, how it affects us and how it moves us, literally. Now, at first, I had no clue what was going on. But as the weeks went by, I ended up learning about why Eddie ended up getting it, just like any other student. In order for me to explain that, though, you'll have to understand a few things about sound. Okay, so sound is just pressure waves moving throughout space. When I make a noise, I cause a physical vibration that moves through the air and that our ears are designed to pick up. Okay, now sounds can be high or low. All right, that's called pitch, and we measure that in hertz. So the higher a sound's pitch is, the faster that wave is vibrating. The lower the pitch is, the slower it moves. Now, we organize sound into different ranges depending on their pitch. So let me show you. Here's the frequency, the spectrum of frequencies that the human ear can hear, with the low sounds on the left, the high sounds on the right. Okay? The first range we have is the sub-bass range. All right? At 60 hertz and below, this is nearly inaudible. It's mostly just felt more than it is heard. And it can physically shake things. So sounds like planes going over us or thunder in the distance fall into this range. So check it out. Next, we have the bass range. Okay, now bass range is where low sounds start to become much more audible. But bass is very physical. It moves through our bodies. Now, something I actually found interesting is that Eddie can actually feel people when they talk behind his back because lower human voices fall in the higher end of the bass range. Check this out. Everyone, I have a microphone, so it's hard, but put your hand on your chest, and on 3, we're all going to say, ah, in a deep voice, okay? 1, 2, 3. Ah. See how you could feel that? So can he. So check out, here's a nice deep voice for you.
The lower your voice is, the better you sound.
You like that, huh? Yeah. All right, next we have the low mid-range. This is where most musical instruments start to fall. It can still be felt, but not quite as much as the sub-bass and the bass range. Anybody recognize that? Yeah. All right, so everything above that is where sound is much more heard rather than felt. That gradient up there is where the feeling of sound starts to taper off and it's mostly just heard. The far right is what we call the high range. It's where sound just gets more nuanced. Brightness is another term for that. All right, now, think back to how Eddie responded to all those drums. When I hit that bass drum, it opened up a new world for him, okay? And that's because Eddie experiences the bass drum similarly to the way we do, because the bass drum falls primarily in the sub-bass and the bass range. Next, in the toms and the snare, the other drums on the drum set, he said he could feel those, but they felt smaller relative to their size. That's because they fall in the bass and the low mid-range. And then there was that crash cymbal, the one that just didn't register at all for him, nothing. That's because the crash cymbal falls primarily in the high range. So over the months, Eddie and I developed this system of communicating how the drums felt. We would literally use our hands like this relative to the sizes. We learned how to read drum music without a problem, and we worked on stick technique. Turns out, drums are the perfect instrument for someone with deafness to learn because it's largely physical, it provides instant physical feedback, and reading drum music isn't a problem since drum music doesn't require pitch. Drumming was a revelation for Eddie. Now, about 2 months ago, I actually met with Eddie's family to tell them about this speech, and I asked Eddie if he would explain what being deaf is like for people who might not be familiar with it. And now, translated by his mom, they said that deafness is isolating. It creates a lonely world, and Eddie feels misunderstood because of the communication disparity between him and people who speak. See, people who are born deaf, they don't grow up thinking and communicating exactly like people who hear, so Eddie mostly just didn't bother. But every Saturday, when we sat down to play drums, I saw him come alive. We were connected by this language that didn't require words or translations, and that communication brought him out of that isolation. Now, as a teacher, I think Eddie was that shake-up that every educator periodically needs to break up the monotony. So no longer do I just run my mouth endlessly to fill up space or force curriculum on kids that doesn't apply. I just let the students show who they are, how they learn best, and then adapt to them. And outside of teaching, I kind of look at everyone differently now. I really like to watch how people dance way more intently now at concerts. And the best example of how music physically affects people is at dubstep and EDM concerts. Okay, now, if that just totally flew over your head, dubstep is like electronic DJ music. You push a button and it's really loud. That's basically the gist of it. So, yeah. But when you go to these concerts, it's really fun because there's always a part in every song where the DJ builds up that intensity, and then he cuts the song out. And then he unloads the entirety of the low end of the frequency spectrum onto the crowd, and everyone just starts convulsing in unison. You know, this music gets criticized often for not having like music or melodic value, but the magic is how that DJ abuses the part of sound that physically affects us, consuming our bodies and souls. Interestingly enough, that sensation is universal, despite whatever sense you might lack. Now, I stopped teaching Eddie because I moved to New Orleans. And since then, his family told me that they can't find a drum teacher because nobody is willing to try on him. Honestly, if you would have asked 21-year-old me in advance if I'd teach a deaf kid how to play music, I don't know, I might have responded the same. Luckily, though, Eddie's mom over there went with the good old Trojan horse method on me, which seemed pretty sneaky at the time, but obviously I couldn't be more grateful that that's the way you did it now. And to those people who won't teach Eddie drums, I say your loss. Remember that video we watched at the beginning of this speech, the one of Eddie playing drums? That was taken 2 months ago, 6 years after his last drum lesson with me. He did that on his first try, and I did not tell him that we were going to be playing drums or ask him to practice before. I didn't. But he just did that. Music is a language that is programmed into him now, and it's hard to think that under slightly different circumstances, he might not have been afforded the ability to discover that gift. Yes, Eddie's creative process is very unique, and his experience with music is distinctly different from any of ours. But ultimately, he comes away with the exact same feeling every musician has: a love for playing and a passion for this language that requires no words. Thanks. Actually, everybody, Eddie's here. Eddie's here today, so the ASL translation for applause is like this. So while I'm walking off, let's all give him the appropriate round of applause.